and welcome to our Empower Law Firm Leaders series, where we'll be talking to experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and head of marketing at Osprey Approach, and today I'm joined by the author of The Heart of Practice, Leadership Principles for Legal Professionals, podcaster, non-practising solicitor, and for the last 30 years, an executive consultant for legal professionals across the globe, Simon Tupman. Welcome, Simon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, good evening to you all. Thank you for having me.
Today, we'll be discussing how to be a successful law firm leader. We'll cover the principles of leadership and how to effectively build a high-performing team and workplace culture. We'll also discuss what makes a good leader, how to drive change in your firm, and advice for the future leaders. So first, Simon, tell me a little bit about your background and experience that's led you to where you are today.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, I think it's important that my comments today are sort of put into context. So as you kindly said in the introduction, apart from being podcaster, but former practicing solicitor. So many decades ago, like many young hopefuls, I started out there at the College of Law in Chester, and I became a practicing solicitor with a firm in London, and I found myself doing criminal defence work. It was a litigation firm, but they started passing all the magistrates' court files to me. Well, not all of them, but some of them. And as a result of accident more than design, I ended up going to court every day, going to prisons, and that was my life really. Police stations, duty solicitor, you name it. And I did that for a number of years, and it became apparent to me that I found this work unfulfilling. I was at a stage in my life when I knew this wasn't what I wanted to do, but I didn't really know what I did want to do. And so I asked for help, which is always a good thing. And I went to speak to a career counsellor, and one thing led to another. And consequently, I ended up going back to university, doing a 1 year's Master of Bugger All, as I call it, an MBA, which taught me lots of things which they didn't teach me at law school, and filled my brain with lots of concepts and ideas, but with little practical experience, of course. And then, as luck would have it, I ended up working for one of UK's leading advertising agencies for a couple of years. They had a sort of consulting research division. And I really enjoyed that. I mean, the culture, it was just a real eye-opener. It was very, very different from what I've been used to, in a legally aided firm. Colour, new computers, a lot more people. We were talking, the sort of work that was totally alien to me, I have to say, but very stimulating. And so I was with that organisation for 2 years, and again, always enjoyed travel. Found myself in Australasia in December, January, and I decided that there was a future for me down under, and so I moved with no job to New Zealand in early 1992, and then not long after that I secured a post as an in-house marketing manager with a 22-partner law firm. So that gave me the opportunity to apply some of the ideas that I'd learned at the advertising agency and put them into practice for this particular law firm. One of which was getting feedback from clients, something that I find firms are still not great at doing. So we're talking about leadership today, but when we look at leadership from an external perspective, which is not covered in my book, certainly I think this idea of allowing clients to offer their input into your decision making, I think is a vital tactic, and one that many firms still ignore today. So that really is the background to how I sort of morphed into law firm management consultancy. And since 1994, I've been basically respectfully self-employed and working as a consultant, speaker, facilitator for law firms looking to navigate change and take their firms to the next level.
Yeah, well, it's great to be joined by a fellow marketer, and it's great to have that perspective from a law firm, as well as being in it, but also having to communicate your value to your customers and how that impacts your perspective and change of mind. So yeah, that's going to input into a lot of the advice and best practices today. So looking forward to getting stuck into that. But before we do, I'd love to jump into just some quick takeaways for listeners. I hope they stick around to the end. But if they've only got 5 minutes, what are the top 3 lessons you've learned from running a successful law firm over the last 30 years?
Well, I should point out I've never actually run one, but in terms of working with them, I'd say what would be my top 3? I would probably say that firstly, run your firm as a business, not just as a private practice. And obviously, I can expand on that a bit further on in our chat today. Secondly, I think it's important to be human throughout this journey, not try to be someone that you aren't. And thirdly, I think it's important to look to the future, and that involves being aware of not only what other firms are doing within this industry, within this profession, but also looking outside of it for examples of what good business practice and innovation are, and how they might best be applied in your firm.
Yeah, I love those top 3 tips. And like you said, we will touch on them more in a little. Particularly love the human element. I think leadership, particularly, you don't get anywhere without being authentic. And to be authentic, you need to be vulnerable. And that's at the core of being human, really, isn't it? So yeah, I love that top tip.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, there are plenty more, but there'll probably be, I think, if you're not doing those 3, then I think you're vulnerable as a firm.
Yeah, very true. So in your latest book, The Heart of Practice, I had the pleasure of reading it. I scribbled loads of notes all over it, which, there we go, there it is in the flesh. Yeah, scribbled loads of notes all over it, which I've picked out a few key things to talk through today.
Sure.
But in the book at the start, you said that you'd created the book about leadership because you felt that there weren't any that addressed the unique challenges facing professionals in law firms. So I just wanted to start the conversation by discussing what are those unique challenges that you felt you needed to write The Heart of Practice?
Sure, thank you. Well, in terms of, like the background, I should probably say what brought me to write the book in the first place was partly professional frustration, because as a consultant over the years, I'd find out I might be going into firms that are incrementally improving, and they're adding on things to the existing structure that they've got or the existing way of doing things, and sometimes with success, sometimes without success. And as an example, as an outsider, I might come in and facilitate a partner retreat, and then 12 months later, I'll go back and say, well, how are we doing? And they might say, well, a lot of the things we said we'd do at the retreat have gone on the back burner because we kind of got busy. And I thought, where is the leadership here? The change isn't happening. People are just responding and on the back burner, dealing and putting fires out, if you like, rather than actually seriously thinking about the future and navigating a change and a direction for a firm, as well as the people who work in those organizations. And so that, coupled with COVID, meant that I was isolated to my office here, and I thought, well, let's make the best use of my time. And so I started thinking about the issues that impact on firms that aren't addressed in, say, many of the books that are on my shelf behind me here, which are on the topic of leadership. None of them deals with what I regard as the peculiarities of the legal profession. And indeed, in my experience, talking to lots of legal professionals, they rarely go out to W.H. Smith and start looking along the bookshelf and leadership books, because there's nothing in there that says, hey, this is for you. They're often generic books on leadership, and that's not to say they're not relevant. Of course they are, and we all love the Simon Sinex and all that sort of stuff. But I wanted to try and extract the guts of a lot of that thinking, and try and say, okay, this is relevant for you, Mr. or Mrs. Lawyer, or Mr. or Mrs. General Manager, CEO of a law firm, and try and capture those peculiarities. And I put the peculiarities down to 3 things. Firstly, I think it's the partnership model and the restrictions that come as a result of that. It is a model that served law firms very well over the years. But I think in today's environment, for partners to expect that they, by virtue of being a partner, they've therefore got a right to have a say in every decision that's made about the firm, which is the case quite often in still a lot of small to mid-sized firms, is simply untenable. And so I think, modifications to the partnership model, not just in terms of legal structure, but also in terms of how decisions are made and how firms are run, I think is a vital part in all of this, which is why I suggest in my book that leadership is not just confined to the partners, it's not the domain of the partners, but also the executive leaders in the C-suite, to use the management speak, if you like, leaders of the firm who might not be lawyers, but nevertheless are specialists in management and leadership of operations. So I think adjusting that partnership model so that it is put to its best use and enabling all people in the firm to contribute towards the long-term welfare of the firm, it is one aspect of it which I attempt to deal with in the book. I think the second peculiarity are the personalities of the people, the personalities of lawyers, particularly, who work in the firm. And you would have read that I made reference to some of the research by people like Dr. Larry Richard, who says that basically the personality traits of lawyers are basically diametrically opposed to those expected of a leader. And that in itself causes issues. And so I think we're now seeing a lot of work going into enabling senior lawyers in particular, but I love the focus on the emerging leaders, the new generation coming through, to ensure that they have a self-awareness about their own blind spots, unconscious biases, whatever it might be, in terms of how they deal with people, not just talking about clients, but the firm generally. Do they understand how their behavior can impact on people and make a really bad day at the office? If they come into work in a bad mood, how's that going to impact on everyone else? And then you scratch your head and say, oh, so-and-so's just handed in their resignation. I wonder, why they were such good lawyers. Well, go and look in the mirror. That might be one reason. So that's the second peculiarity, I think, the personalities of the lawyers. And I think the third one is that, it comes to the territory, the fiduciary nature of being a lawyer and the challenges and the risks and responsibilities associated with that mean that there is a lot of pressure on people's shoulders, and we are only human. And yet, sometimes I think lawyers try to be all things to all people. They don't really own up to their own frailties or limitations. Sometimes they have difficulty saying no. Sometimes they think they can do it themselves rather than delegate. And sometimes they break under the strain, either through stress or through depression. So I think a combination of those three means that we have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, if we are to do better in the future, if we are to create an environment that is engaging for our people and to put in place the building blocks for a long-term, happy, sustainable future for our firms, we have to look at this topic of leadership, which is a topic that's not taught at law school. It's rarely discussed amongst the partnership table. You mentioned the word leadership, and leaders are people who are basically good lawyers and bringing a lot of money into the firm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. I think what have we got there? The three peculiarity P's. We've got partnership,
that's right.
personality,
Partnership
and
model,
pressure.
personalities, and well, the third one was really the professional nature of the work.
Yeah, 100%. And it sort of goes back to your point you said earlier about asking for help and finding some guidance or advice from somebody else, and actually the pressure that they put on themselves and the pressure that's around them and their personality type leads them to not then ask for help and delegate. And I think that allows your book to really stand out and add context as to why all these leadership principles, which, are a common practice, aren't in the legal sector, and this is why. And I think it's important that that's aligned and that's very clear in your book. So I think that, is super helpful for lawyers to add context to that and relate it to themselves.
And can I also say, Amy, that up to this point, those listeners or viewers might say, well, Simon's hasn't said anything that's really rocket science here, and I want to reassure people that in my book, there's no new theory, because I don't think there is a new theory. This is very much about back to basics, but also incorporating stuff that is basic in mainstream business, but perhaps isn't in legal circles. And so there is no new theory. There's no new rocket science here. But I think we ignore sometimes the basics to our own peril. And really, judging by the discussions that I've had with legal professionals since the book was published last year, it's clear that quite often the discussions around these very things have never actually taken place in firms.
Yeah, like it's always the basics that are overlooked. And sometimes we just need a gentle reminder of those things to go, yeah, and that's the light bulb moment you need to put those things in place or to have those conversations. Yeah, absolutely. The second half of your book is dedicated to interviews from leaders across the globe. What's one piece of advice or one idea that's really stuck with you?
I think the main one that's consistent with all of the 10 legal professionals that I interviewed is be human and be yourself. And some people might say, well, what the hell does that mean? Well, it basically means what it says. Don't leave your personality at home when you come to work during the day. Bring yourself, your energy. If you're having a bad day, obviously learn how to contain that or manage it or share it with, a close offsider. But I don't think you can sort of hide behind this armory and try and sort of pretend to be, the micromanager that you aren't, sort of thing. And I think they all, in all the interviewees that I chatted with, all opened up during the interviews and revealed, I think, what you referred to earlier is a very authentic aspect to their personality and the way that they like to deal with people. They all have a commerciality, commercial acumen, which I think is an important attribute behind all of this as well. So that, they understand their role in the world and what it is they're trying to do and why they're doing it. And there are a lot of, I think, professionals out there who are slaving away in the office, but they haven't quite figured out why they're doing it beyond paying the mortgage. And also sometimes they're struggling because they don't have any commercial acumen. That doesn't mean going back to business school and getting an MBA, but it means, I think, reading yourself into some of the aspects about the transition involved in moving away from being just a partnership type firm with just partners sitting around the table to being a thriving legal business.
Yeah, I think the be human element is going to be core to all of this. It certainly was in your book, and it links directly to the find your why. It's funny you mentioned Simon Sinek earlier. That's obviously the title of his book, and I've made a note to mention him later on in something else that you've mentioned as well. And it's so true, because that's the passion. That's why you get out of bed in the morning. That's why you're willing to coach people and build good teams. And you have to find your why, and you have to be passionate to become a lawyer, to stick with it with everything that you've mentioned above, the pressures and everything.
And on that point, I think I also want to raise this aspect too that may be helpful, is that one of the books on the shelf behind me is written there by the great David Maister, who retired quite a few years ago. And I remember in his book True Professional, he said, I reckon about 10% of professionals I work with actually love what they do. He said about 65% tolerate it, and about another 30% wonder, how the hell did I get into this? And I don't know if those statistics hold true. I haven't tried and tested it, but from my experience, there are, I think, just a small percentage that have found their sweet spot. They're passionate about the work they're doing. It's meaningful for them. It's making full use of their professional skills. They allow their personality to shine. That pays them well. There are some people that perhaps aren't so passionate about it. I've often been approached by people who say, God, you managed to get out. How did you do it? It's like, once you're in law, it's sometimes very hard to shake it off. And I've never managed to shake it off, but I've reinvented myself to approach the legal services sector from a different perspective. And that's not to say that those people that might be unhappy in their work at the moment and haven't quite found their sweet spot. That's not to say they can't find it. It's simply that they often don't have the tools or the support to be able to open up and suddenly say, "Hey, I'm really enjoying this," or I'm suddenly my career is starting to go like that.
Yeah, and I think it slightly leans into the personality types of being willing to experiment. So that's not only in the work that you do, but also who you want to be and who you want to align your values to. And that links very nicely into my next point that I wanted to discuss, because you mentioned a lot about creating an effective workplace culture and how that links to well-being and mental health. And I guess that links to your point about being human. In order to improve that, you mentioned it will require leaders to challenge some of those entrenched beliefs and working practices that dictate how law firms traditionally operate. One of the entrenched beliefs you discuss is the partnership equals leadership. You did touch on that earlier. Why is that belief no longer serving law firms? Why is that not appropriate today?
Well, I think that I'm not saying that there are partners who aren't leaders. What I'm saying is that there are many who are leaders and should be leaders, but I think our thoughts or preconceptions around leadership have often been confined to the partnership table. That leadership is about having the moral authority to tell people what to do. And that's a very narrow view of leadership. It might have worked 40 years ago, but I don't think it works in today's market because stakeholders, particularly young professionals, don't respond to that. And so I think the concept of leadership is open to everyone who works in a business. Doesn't matter how young or junior you may be. I think, and I've witnessed young people coming through who have leadership qualities. They're very self-aware. They're very good with other people. They're great with clients, and they know how to handle themselves. And conversely, I've come across partners in firms who don't meet those standards. They may be great lawyers, but as my book points out, this isn't a book about becoming a better black letter lawyer per se. This is about becoming a better person and a better professional working within a law firm, essentially. And so, for those partners whose behavior sometimes lets them down, there's an invitation in the book to say, have a look in the mirror and do some work on yourselves to figure out if you're unhappy, why you're unhappy, and what you can do about it. If you're not confident in dealing with people, then understand what it is that those younger people expect from you and want from you as their leader. Ask the questions. Be prepared to entertain the answers, no matter how constructively critical they may be. Get yourself the knowledge about how the law firm should tick, how it should be governed, and get comfortable with the idea of marketing, business development, innovation, getting feedback from clients, all those kind of things. And so therefore, that was my point. Don't just assume that by partnership it means you're automatically a leader. Yes, it means that you're expected to set a standard and a behavior. But what I've experienced, Amy, particularly in the last 12 months when I've been working with emerging leaders coming through who are senior associate level and who may be making that next step into partnership, is that many of those lawyers have no idea what's involved in making the transition from employee to employer. My research with them ahead of a workshop that I've been running for them suggests that they think partnership is a promotion and a pay rise. And it comes with the opportunity to have more say in how the firm is run and so on. And I think it's important for firms to understand that they need to have a policy in place that sets out the pathway to partnership, that clearly articulates the expectations that they have of them, and also modifies the expectations that their senior associates have of partnership or leadership. And I think that divide needs to be bridged. At the moment, people say we still have this them and us culture in our firm between the partners and everyone else. A great deal of work can be done just to build those bridges through communication, through education, understanding, so that we have this discussion about leadership. and that it's not just confined to this notion of, I refer to it in the book a bit like boarding school. It's not becoming a prefect and having, authority with what comes with that. It's much broader than that. So that's one of the entrenched beliefs that you picked out from my book that I articulated.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that. I mean, with all business leadership, when you get promoted into leadership, you actually typically stop doing the things perhaps you love to do because you're not in the trenches doing the work every day. You then have to be involved in what's the strategy, what's the vision, what's that moving forward. And I guess if those lines are blurred, like you said, you might be losing some of the stuff that you love and then also have a skills gap in the things that's expected of you. So yeah, you quoted in the book Joel Borolsky, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly,
Correct.
who you had a guest on your podcast, Law Chat, and he said that he's a fan of the dyad where there's a COO and a CEO and a managing partner working hand in glove. Do you believe that that's the answer to this potential issue? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't think it's the full answer, but I think when we talk about leadership in law firms, I think the aspect of governance and decision making is vital. And I think that was the context in which Joel was making his comments. We were having a discussion about how firms make that transition away from being what they call if you like, the old-fashioned type firm that's made up of partners who are working in silos, being autonomous, doing their own thing, referring to my clients, not our clients, sharing office space, having a car parking space, but basically working almost, if you like, the barrister's chambers model. And he was talking about how firms over the last few years, the more they've become operational like a business, they've worked towards the old Mesa definition of the one firm, integrating everyone so that, the very heart of the firm is this notion that the firm is bigger than any one individual in the firm. And in terms of taking the firm in that direction, I think Joel's point was that when we talk about governance, who's going to run this place? We have to open up to the fact that, as lawyers, as you say, it's if they love being lawyers, they don't want to be CEOs necessarily. So, the role of managing partner is not one that's taken lightly. And those people that do accept the mantle have got to be prepared to accept that they're going to have to forego a certain percentage of their legal business in order to manage or lead their firms with an executive hat on. Now, many of those people, as we all know, are not trained to take on that role. They sometimes do it because the face fits, they're good with their people, they've got an interest in making sure that the firm is profitable and so on, which is probably why, so many managing partners have taken themselves off to Harvard or the old Nottingham Law School, whatever it might be, to go up that learning curve so that they have a better understanding in terms of what's involved in actually running a legal practice or legal business. So I think Joel's comment there is a reflection of the increasing executivization, which is a phrase I really like that Chris Bull at the Edge Group coined. The idea that we're now introducing more people into our executive suites who've got pedigree in as chief executives or chief operation officers, marketing directors, IT directors, directors of culture or whatever, people who are not micromanagers, but understand the role that everyone in the executive suite needs and can play in furthering the causes of a legal business. And I think that dyad that Joel talked about has shown itself to be a successful model in a certain size of firm. I mean, obviously, the bigger the firm, this is obviously more important. But even within the last couple of years, there's one client that comes to mind that really, it was only a small 4-partner firm with a practice manager who is, hardworking, glorified administrator probably, and I mean that in a caring way. She's very capable, but I don't think she's necessarily been given the appropriate authority to make decisions like a general manager, having a job description that covers exactly the things that she is empowered to do. And on the other side of the coin, you've got 4 partners sitting around the table trying to make decisions about everything from recruitment to buying the latest practice management software, whatever it might be. And I said, this isn't going to work. You need to have in my view, one of you who's overseeing these decisions, who's got authority given to them by the rest of the partnership to make executive decisions. And that's really important. And that's why I think the case study that I put in there of Robert Camp and Stephen Scone in Plymouth was such a good one, because, you know, that's one of the first things he did when he took over the reins as managing partner, was to completely change that decision-making structure and refine it and improve it so that, you know, things could get done.
Yeah, and I think that lends itself to the first point, your first top tip for running a successful law firm is running it as a business entity, and recognizing that to be a successful modern law firm and to run a 21st century law firm, you have to have your operations in order and running efficiently. You have to have your marketing and business development in order. And there's so many additional skills required to run a business. No one's ever run a business on their own. That those additional C-suite roles can help the managing partner and can be their right-hand guy or their right-hand woman to building out this legal business. You touched on the Dr. Larry Richards study earlier, where they took the personality test. I've just got the note here that says lawyers scored lower than public on sociability, resilience, and empathy. Like you said, arguably qualities that a leader needs to exhibit. What other characteristics or skills make an effective leader?
Well, in the book, I listed a number there, and I took those attributes from the interviews that I conducted with the interviewees. And in a nutshell, I would summarize it. I'll be specific in a minute, but in a nutshell, I'd say commercial acumen is one of them, and very human qualities such as stop trying to be perfect. I think that's really important, because lawyers are trained to be perfectionists. We can't seem to be failing at anything. But we're human, and I think, you know, some of the interviews there pointed out the fact that we have to be vulnerable, and I think that gets buy-in from people around us, that they can see our humanity when we go to work every day. Other words that came through, apart from humility, which I think is an important one, benevolence, being kind, and being emotionally intelligent. All of these, you know, really important. Compassionate, curious, courageous, being a good listener, being selfless, and being visionary. They're all explained in more detail in the book, and as you'll know, I've tried to break down this topic of leadership, which is so broad, into four areas in the interest of simplicity. And so these attributes that I'm talking about are in the first of those areas when it comes to self-leadership. You know, how do people conduct themselves better? And I think, firstly, having an understanding of our own abilities and capabilities, and our own human attributes is important, which is why I think some of the leaders that I interviewed go to great lengths to become more self-aware, either through personality profiling, by having a coach or a mentor to point out to them their blind spots or their unconscious biases. And so, you know, I think getting a clear handle on what you're good at and what you're not good at, I think is an important aspect of this, because I think it's not just an exercise in critique, but it's also one in terms of support as well. So that's the self-leadership piece. And what we've been talking about here, I'll just deal with the other three areas if I can, because I think that gives us a context as well. So there's the self-leadership, and the principle behind that is before you lead others, learn to lead yourself. The second area is in terms of people leadership, and my principle there is basically treat people as you would like to be treated. I have been challenged on that, Amy. Some people have said, well, maybe it should be treat people as they want to be treated. And then we get into all sorts of conversations about whether generation X or Y, the treatment they want is the treatment that, you know, they should be having. But I think what my point there is treat people well. The third area of leadership is business leadership, and that is run your firm as a business entity. And the fourth area is community leadership, and the principle there is help solve some of the world's problems. So I start with those four principles and sort of expand it with some very specific initiatives as well. So back to attributes, you know, I think that in terms of an order, I think we've got to be seen to be leading ourselves to have any credibility. And I think all those leadership principles are interdependent. And what I mean by that is that it's all very well to have your firm run as a business entity, but if you've got partners in positions of leadership who aren't leading themselves well and behaving in ways that piss people off, then that will completely undermine the efforts of those in your executive suite who are trying to navigate and drive this firm forward. Conversely, you do meet, I often meet firms made up of lovely people, very conscientious, a lot of pastoral care there. They're good at conducting themselves. They're good at leading their people, but they couldn't run a piss up in a brewery. And so when it comes to basically managing and leading their firms, they've no idea. So do you see what I'm saying? I think there's an equal reliance got to be placed on each of those four domains of leadership. And that's why I think in terms of order, I think, leading yourself before you lead others is so important.
Yeah, you have to have that emotional intelligence to be able to, like you've said several times, to be self-aware. And it's almost those sort of qualities that you listed are things that are often underrated, or often things that you come across someone and you think that they're a great person, they light up a room, they deliver good energy, and you can't really put your finger on why. And a lot of those points and attributes you just mentioned are probably why. I particularly love the word curious. I think that can solve a lot of life's challenges. Be curious about problems, be curious about people, be curious about your clients. I particularly love that word. But again, like you said, it has to be married up with the business leadership and being able to make decisions, saying yes, saying no, as and when you need to, and not being scared of failure, because not every decision you make is going to be the right one, inevitably.
That's right. That's right. And that fear of failure, I think, is a big one here. And it comes up. I think that's all part and parcel of innovation and experimenting. And say for example, firm says, well, we've actually not moved away from the billable hour to introducing fixed pricing on our conveyancing service. How does that work? Well, be curious about it. Go and see what other firms, how they've made the transition, and understand the thinking that goes into revamping your pricing is the word I prefer, not billing or costing. We've got to be aware that words are very powerful too in this scenario. And make that transition away from the billable hour. Give it a go. It doesn't mean you introduce it right across the firm, but you might start with a few files or in a practice area and say, let's launch it, let's give it a go. And hey, we might not get it right first time, but we tweak it and we experiment with it. So that's just an example of how I think we can learn to get comfortable with a few failures along the way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you also mentioned that the key part about being human and being self-aware is that how your actions can influence the team and influence the culture as a whole. And a lot of the leaders that I've had the pleasure of speaking to, it's very clear that building or changing an effective workplace culture is crucial for any sort of change or any sort of long-term success. But obviously that isn't easy, especially when you're not building the culture from scratch, but looking to change it. You highlight the four initiatives that you've just mentioned, and one element is measure what matters. So typically firms have been focusing on measuring inputs over outputs, like time spent in the office or hour billed. And I said that I was going to bring up Simon Sinek again, but he spoke about this challenge in a talk I watched recently. He mentioned that there are plenty of measures for performance. That's really easy to track, but there are none for trust, which is why toxic people tend to get promoted or are given bonuses. So I just wanted to touch on your opinions or your thoughts on effective success measures that leaders should be focusing on to make sure they've got a high-performing team and an effective workplace culture.
Very good question too, and I think it's one that firms often grapple with a great deal. And I think you're quite right to point out there that unless we put in place the right key performance measures, then it can lead to the wrong people getting promoted for often the wrong reasons. And I think central to this is this aspect of trust that you point out, that when you are building a culture, it needs to be one that's, I think, built on trust, but also I think there's an aspect of self-responsibility here. And you'll appreciate that throughout my consulting career, I've come into contact with some firms who seem to get this really well. And one such firm I know of in Melbourne, they introduced a system which has worked very well for them, whereby they are at pains not to manipulate people or tell people, say, look, here are the key performance measures we expect from you. But they almost invite their employees to sign up to their own chosen key performance measures. It's an agreement made in advance that's not just focused on inputs, but also outputs, with a view to helping that person develop and grow professionally as an individual. Now, the number of things that they might look at, and the important thing here is too, is it's not just an annual review, that it's reviewed regularly, so probably at least every 6 months. David Sharrock was the person who impressed me greatly. He was the founder of a firm called Sharrock Pittman Legal in Melbourne. He's recently retired, but before he retired, he wrote a fabulous book that expands on this issue and what they did actually in their firm. But some of the key performance measures which his firm introduced, and I share it with other firms because I think it can be quite powerful, is the idea of not only agreeing key performance measures in advance with your people, but getting them to take control of it. They keep a journal, and every 6 months they sit down with their people and say, how are we getting on? And the sort of things that they look at would be, as part of that journal, having ideas, suggestions, to satisfy the curiosity. How can we be better as a firm? How can you be better as a firm? What things would you like to do to grow professionally? What programs do you want to go on? Not just restricting it to black letter continuing legal education, a workshop on the latest legislation, but it might be an Anthony Robbins course, or it might be going and a presentation skills course, a business skills course, something that is going to help them grow and develop. And that's part of a personal plan as well, that sort of says, this is what I'm aiming to do. And 6 months later, well, how are you getting along with it? To what extent are you implementing it? Looking at things like business generated or new leads that have been generated. And how did you go about doing that? What networking events did you go to? What new files have you opened? What debts or bills have you actually brought in? I mean, so many people up there, I think, don't have the thinking cap on. They think once they sent the bill out, that's it. Well, cash in the bank, as Simon McCrum would have told you on one of the previous episodes of this podcast, would have told you how important cash is. It's not just sending out the invoices or meeting your budget. It's about getting paid. So, giving people that economic education, I think, is really important. And I have to say on that point that there are still an awful lot of people in firms who are flying blind because they don't even understand the financial health of the firms. It's like a big secret in so many firms. So giving people an opportunity to understand how their contribution fits into the big picture, and that gives meaning to the idea of generating profit and income for a firm beyond just making money, which doesn't necessarily excite people. Client satisfaction, there's a good measure. And I know some firms that, really embrace the idea of saying, we love your feedback, whether it's using a net promoter score, some kind of online scoring mechanism, or even just testimonials that may come in and say, hey, look, my clients love me to death. Look, read at these testimonials. I think, that's an example of, an external input coming in and shaping the thinking and giving people a much needed pat on the back for good work that they've actually done. And maybe some subjective assessment in terms of overall contribution. So, I mean, I've outlined, a number of areas there that firms can think about, breaking away from just here's your budget and you did quite well in these areas, and nowhere there have I talked about the quality of work that's being delivered. But I think quality of service as well as the quality of the legal work that's being given is obviously really important as well. Having that smiling face and just following up with people on time and communicating and so on, all of these aspects I think can go into a smorgasbord of key performance measures that go beyond what many firms currently have as their protocol.
Yeah, and also key performance measures that focus on the key challenges that law firms are facing. We know that exceeding client expectations is a key challenge, and we also know that retaining and attracting talent. So if you're measuring success measures that help to empower employees and impress your clients, then you're probably going to be a hell of a lot better than your competitors who aren't doing that.
I think so. And those key performance measures, I've sort of given them within the context of employees, but I think there need to be some key performance measures in terms of partners as well, or at least team leaders who may be senior associates, in order to improve this aspect of leadership. So one of those may well be a key performance measure. How are you measuring up to being a leader of your team? What is the feedback you're getting from your team members in terms of how you currently lead your team? How well are you mentoring members of your practice group or your team? And how are you contributing towards the implementation of the firm's overall growth plan? So those are some, measures for practice group heads as well, which I think can really help the firm.
Yeah, and are super important to make sure to measure how well of a leader you are, and where your
Yeah.
skills or blind spots are. I really love that idea of the employees suggesting KPIs, because I think that ties back into your first point about what is your why? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you work at this particular firm? Why do you do what you do? And if there's something you particularly care about and that can be part of your KPIs, well, all power to them to help and improve on that. So I really love that idea. I think that's a really great takeaway here. You mentioned before that one of the four principles is run your firm like a business, and you quoted Lucy Dickens, who I'll just read it out here because I love the quote. If you make no effort to improve your business operations, your success will always be limited by our hourly rate multiplied by the number of hours you bill. So for those firms who are perhaps in a situation where they know they need to improve, they know they need to modernize some operations in order to get away from that challenge that they're in, but they're not really sure where to start, do you have any sort of best practices or suggestions for what they should focus on first?
Well, I part of my business often get rung up by firms who are in that position, and their knee-jerk reaction is, we need to have a retreat. And I say, well, a retreat's not necessarily going in itself, sitting around the table isn't going to solve our problems. It might be a forum for discussion. The approach that I advocate and take with my clients is to start firstly with what I call a practice review. And a practice review is basically like taking the temperature of the firm, both culturally, economically, and leadership-wise, just to say, how is the firm currently constituted? How is it operating? Is it successful? Where are its weak points? What needs improving, and so on? And that's a process that involves asking employees for their input into the process. It involves discussions with the partners to gauge their aspirations for the future and their perceptions about how the firm is currently operating and how it's currently run. And also getting an independent assessment in terms of the financials to see if there's financial leakage, poor practices there. We all know so many firms are sitting on debt that they don't collect in time, or work in progress. Firms then say, oh, we're maybe not quite making enough money, and therefore we can't invest in the future of our senior associates, and say, well, if you collected some of this money, you might have some more money to invest in the future of the firm. So, those sort of things, I sort of defer to an accountant to do that financial assessment. But basically, by having a document there which incorporates a snapshot review, and depends how far you want to go, but it can also involve getting some feedback from some of your clients, which I think is obviously hugely valuable. A snapshot that sort of says, this is our positioning in the marketplace at the moment. We're quite happy in the market in which we're operating, but we need to be more competitive. We need to be running ourselves in a much more efficient or effective way. We need to stop doing certain things. We need to start maybe adding on parts or improving parts to what we're already doing. And that enables, I think, the decision makers in these firms to develop a list of priorities and things to tackle. Now, this then opens up the discussion for how do you bring about change in a firm, which is a topic worthy of an entire podcast in itself. We may not have the time for that, but to try and drive the discussion, one thing that I encourage firms to do is to think about bringing about change. People have got to want it. You can't impose change on people, because I think they will resist it. They will regard you as a micromanager. And I think that quite often, if change is imposed on people rather than it being chosen, then people will just regard it as being, a phony type of change. It's not real. They tried to do something like that before and it never really worked. So you never get buy-in. But if it is it is change that's going to the heart of the firm, to the culture, rather than just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, but something's going to be significant and meaningful for the people that work in that firm and beneficial for them, then I think that's when you start to get buy-in. Now, you can't do it overnight, but I think if the reasons for introducing change are considered, they're well thought through, based on consultation with people, based on research, then people will get it. And then they will start to say, yes, I can see that there are benefits to me as an individual, as well as to us collectively, as a group of professionals working together to actually roll our sleeves up and start to make things happen. And this is where I think it falls down in lots of firms, because we don't really know how to get people from over here to over here. Sometimes we try to do it too quickly. Sometimes our efforts fall down. Sometimes we fail to understand the emotional blockers of change, as I call them, when people sabotage it because they don't feel that the change has been sold to them, or they have had no say in the change that takes place. And in the book, I used an example from Jason Clark, who did a TED talk a few years ago on bringing about change. It was a fabulous talk, and I credit him in the book. But one of the techniques he uses there is what he called the renovator's dream. And you have a simple matrix and says, look, think about your firm. It's been around for many years. Think of it like an old cottage. And that cottage is in need of a bit of renovation. It needs tarting up a bit. Might need more than a paint job. It might need to knock a few walls down. It might need some new tenants in the building. I know not. Some new plumbing. But think about it like, say, it doesn't mean we need to knock the whole thing down and start again, but we look and we keep the things that are really good. We get rid of the things that aren't serving us anymore. And we perhaps add things that we're going to need. It may be a new kitchen or a new bathroom or a new practice management software program. When you start having a really simple discussion using a framework like that, and I've used that for some of the retreats I facilitated, it's amazing how a simple framework like that can stimulate some very bright people to grab their little, post-it pads like this and start saying, right, I'm going to stick my ideas on the board. And suddenly you get unity around some specific issues, and that reveals consensus about things that they want to add, improve, change, or get rid of in a firm. Very simple technique, but that's one way, I think, amongst the partnership that you can start getting buy-in to some concepts.
Yeah, and I guess there's no use in spending time and resource thinking about the change and then not having the buy-in to do it, because you've wasted your time in putting that together. So I love the idea of making sure that that initial thought process isn't siloed. It isn't just decided by the managing partner, the CEO. It's
Right.
taken in consideration, it's taken in research, it's taken in feedback. Therefore, you get that buy-in. Therefore, when you're ready to implement it, you're already halfway there.
I think so.
Hope so. Just to round up this conversation, Simon, it's been so brilliant. And I just want to share maybe one piece of advice for future leaders on how they can be the best law firm leader they can be.
Oh gosh, one piece of advice. I'd say get help when you need it. One of the things that came through from the interview is that you can't do it all alone, and that becoming a leader. Some people are already very good at leading, and they probably know it. Some people think they are good at leading, but they're not, and they don't know it, sort of thing. And I think that getting support, whether, as I say, it's support externally from people who can either give you encouragement or reveal to you shortcomings in your capabilities, I think is a major step forward. And it's interesting. I was involved in a partner retreat about a month ago, and one of the partners there said, "I now have a coach." But she said 3 years ago, I would never have said that at a partners retreat. I'd have been embarrassed to say so. But now I'm confident to say that not only do I have one, but that this coach has helped me to improve my self-confidence in the leadership field greatly. And she said to all her partners, I encourage you all to have an offsider, someone who can help you and talk you through the issues, and to help you to find your sweet spot, and become the leader that you always have the potential to become.
I think that is a brilliant way to end the conversation. Simon, thank you so much for your advice and your time on how to build an effective leadership team and be the best law firm leader you can be. So thank you so much for your time, Simon. I really appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.